Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back, everyone. He is the coach's coach. This is the man that helps people learn proper leadership. And that could be anybody. Could be an individual, C-suite executive, CEO, somebody that owns a company. He's also an accomplished pilot and teaches people how to fly. It's interesting how we've tied those two occupations into some of the lingo. With both of them, today we're going to talk about your awareness as a leader. And then I do believe that even in aeronautics, there's situational awareness. Again, there's a tie-in somehow there. Randy Swaim is back with us. Hey, Randy, how you doing?
Yeah, good. It's good to be with you again, Steve.
You too. Yeah. Learned a lot, especially about the neuroscience involved in a lot of this in terms of leadership, how somebody's brain works, whether it's your own or member of the team that you're leading. With the awareness of what's going on around you, where do we begin today?
Well, I tell you what I thought we would do is because last week we mentioned a picture of Sullenberger's situation and everything. We talked about that, and but what I was going to do today is kind of point out, you sort of aligned with that, but also two rules that I never violated as a pilot and stuff. But you know what? We're going to bring out some situational awareness insight and then bring it into leading, because guess what? It's no different than if you're leading your teams in a challenging environment, because not everything is academic. So that's kind of what I thought I'd bring today.
Wow. When we talk about academics, how do you define that?
Well, basically what a lot of people do is somebody back in a school or in an academic situation, or somebody that was teaching them or whatever, put out an answer to something, and somebody wants that to be the answer for everything. Well, guess what? The factors may be different. It may not be exactly that. And, what so often happens today in leadership areas is, people just go with what they want to be the right academic answer. And if it doesn't happen, they just cast blame on something, that this is just stupid. It should have done this. Well, you know what? It didn't. And it wasn't designed to. And can you make the right decisions? And I think I shared with you, this was I think a few months ago, but I shared with you the ENTSB interview, the National Transportation Safety Board interview, that for an accident report, and they were blown away by my answers and how I interacted, because I brought that fundamental truth into it and everything. And it's something that is very key in leadership, because you know what, very often leaders don't think that way, or true leaders, I think, do, but they don't. They have a tendency to just want this to be the right thing to do, but guess what? May not be. And that's what a lot of people, that's a thought process that many people don't have. So I'll just start out, if you want to, with just the pilot thing, and that'll be just a couple of minutes and stuff, and then we'll bring it over to a leadership aspect about it, if that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Well, I find it interesting how we learn how the mind works, and I don't want to be negative here, but the mistakes that people are making.
And you know what? They're not deliberate mistakes they're making.
Right.
The mistakes come from their lack of awareness of the situation and the lack of the real successful strategy to get there.
Sure.
And that's what many people have missed. And I'll tell you, when we were talking about Sullenberger last week, we were talking about how what he did, his choice to land in the river up there, was exactly the right choice, given the situation and given his experience and his expertise and his skills and all of that. And everybody survived, everybody lived, kind of thing, didn't kill anybody. And I'll just say this just very quickly. The two rules, I think I shared these about a year ago on a show, but I posted them on my social media again just a couple of days ago. But the two rules that I went with in my flying career, one rule is what I said is, if I'm getting ready to take off and there is no plan B, there is no option, the first plan has to work or it's catastrophic. If that's the case, and guess what? Not that usually isn't, but if that's the case, then I would not take off. If that is the only thing, I would not generally take off unless there was some real critical factor, like the airport's blowing up or whatever, kind of thing. But the second rule of it too is one of the things that I always said: if the last 5 minutes of this flight kind of reads like the first paragraph of an accident report, then I was going to change what I did and stuff like that. So, and if you think about it, when you talk about, and one of the things we talked about with Sullenberger is the fact that a lot of people said, well, he should have just gone over to Teterboro. And I brought out several factors that could have made that not work. And he could have killed himself, the people in the airplane, and people on the ground, possibly, if he did that. So the choice he made was totally correct. But I will say this, that when you're talking about unexpected situations that happen in flight, guess what? A lot of it is unexpected. You can't just rotely go back to some rote academic thing and then consider, well, that's a solution. May not be, because you know what? When you bring certain decisions in, sometimes some other factors come in that brought in that you didn't realize. And are you aware of that? And to be honest with it, sometimes, and this is sort of a little bit of a takeaway, but sometimes a situation in flight could be so drastic and dramatic that the best thing the pilot can do, if you're halfway across the Atlantic Ocean and all of this stuff starts failing on your airplane, guess what? The best thing you might do is what Sullenberger did, and that is come in and land the airplane on the ocean and everybody get out in the rafts, kind of thing, possibly, kind of thing. And there's other times where, depending on the situation, I know the airplane that I teach in, the jet airplane that I teach in, if you had to emergency extend the gears, guess what? If one particular piece of it doesn't work right, the gear will never lock down. And in that case, it's a lot better to just land gear up and belly land it rather than doing it. And sometimes, depending on the circumstance, the pilot may need to just bring it back into a smooth and gentle belly landing to save everybody, and so it's not that everything is just rote academic and filling squares. And if you think about it, when you're talking about leading your team and leading yourself, and by the way, developing your team, kind of thing, to be able to perform in situations that are not just rote academic, you have to kind of have some of that processing ability in your brain to truly understand what the right solution is and be ready for this. Because guess what? If you decide to, okay, well, this came up, so we got to go do this. That's what a lot of people think about. But you know what? As soon as you kind of do that, other factors can sneak on that you didn't expect. And they may cause you to adapt it a little bit different or adjust a little bit different way in what you're doing. And you've got to be able to do that. And in some cases, you got to realize that the true solution to the factor that you're trying to achieve here is different when those factors come on scene that you didn't expect, or when you made this choice, and because the choice is a little bit different, it makes some of those factors that were involved interact differently. They may interact in a more critical, disappointing way that you didn't expect. And are you aware of that? And are you aware of truly what you need to do and your team needs to do? And so it's when you look at it from that standpoint, and leading teams in this unexpected, challenging environment where it's not everything's just rote academic, you got to, and you talked about neuroscience, absolutely. You got to have your brain ready so that your frontal lobe can process it correctly, have a true insight as to what it really is without letting it just shut your brain off. Well, that should have been like this, but you know what? It wasn't. and to be able to process it adequately, and also to be able to make the choice where you may have to tweak it, you may have to adapt it, because when you made the change to go in this direction, given the situation that came up, guess what? When you do that, there may be another factor or two that come in that you didn't expect because of that. And do you have, when you're talking about leading teams in a situation and environment which is not totally academic and not totally simple and not totally just front page clear, kind of thing, guess what? Sometimes it's not as clear. And if you think about that aspect with the pilots where they're coming in, sometimes, depending on what you're doing, if it's a direction or if it's a solution that you have to get to, kind of thing, in a challenging situation, then one of the things that you have to be aware of is how are you going to do that, but also realize that in some cases, the success to that situation is this and not that, kind of thing. It might be kind of like landing the airplane, belly landing kind of thing. If you had to, it might be that, well, this will get us there, but it only gets us that far above the minimum thing required. It's not really giving us what we want, but you know what, that can get us there. And let's be aware as we're going forward. And it's one thing to realize that when you're talking about challenging situations, do you have clarity on that in your processing in your brain? Do you have clarity on the factors that you didn't think? Do you have clarity on the fact that if you're planning on plan B instead of plan A, what if plan B doesn't work the way you thought when you apply it? What are you going to do? What are you going to adapt? What are you going to change? What are you going to do to give yourself the chance of making it totally successful? And when you think about this too, there comes the whole point of developing your team to be successful in a challenging environment. And, to what extent are you, having conversations with your team, not to tell them you got to do this, but to give them the insights that will let them process that and kind of get a sense of it. Because a lot of times, if you have, say, 8 people on your team out there in the midst of all of this, there are some times where if you've got your team the ability to develop that processing ability and that situational awareness and that understanding and that good vision kind of thing, you may have one of the people that catches a real satisfactory solution strategy that nobody else on the team saw, including you, possibly. And so, it's one thing to understand how you're truly in challenging situations that aren't just rote academic. And let's face it, most of our world today is not totally academic kind of thing. There's some academic aspects of it, true, but the bottom line is, when you're talking about this aspect of organizational maneuverability and the aspect of being able to perform in a situation or an environment or a scenario that maybe had factors in it that you didn't even know were there. And boy, they're coming on scene here. How do we keep going? How do we get to success with this? And what do we need to do? But the other part of that too is, when you think about it from the standpoint of your team, what do you need to do? What are some of the conversations you need to have with your team that gets them sensing it? And here's the thing, in order to really get them prepared for that, those conversations have to happen even before they need it. And I think I've shared this with you one time, for Steve. One of the things that I've sometimes have done with pilots, not all the time, but I've sometimes when a pilot is finishing up their training, one of the things that I tell them is, I go, well, I'll tell you what, 6 months down the road, if the most unexpected thing comes on scene in the midst of a flight, what do you think it would be? What might it be? And how would you get beyond that and overcome it and be successful? And you know what, when you're talking about leading your team in a challenging environment, it's not just about being able to tell them what to do at the point of attack. It's about building their ability so that they see perhaps the challenge coming on scene, and they already have a picture. Somebody mentioned it, and as a team, you all went, yeah, here's our strategy. And guess what? You can get there with it. And so it's just something to think about when you're talking about that aspect of a challenging situation that sometimes people don't think about. And it's, when you're just thinking about one particular industry and, okay, let's just go do this, that kind of thing. Very often that doesn't get you where you want to be. And the other part of it too is, if you think about it, where it gets you beyond where you were, not just the return on it, but when other people experience something different about the true success and the vision and the strategic aspect and the situational awareness of you and your team, they want you to be more involved in the company sometimes, or some of the people that are aware of what you did. And when they become aware of it, a lot of times they can go, oh, wow, and they want to stay connected with it. And guess what? When you're bringing that along, very often you're bringing a real majestic a success aspect to your organization, and as people see that, very often you may have somebody that, during a situation in their journey, they want to come talk to you about it. And you know what? Maybe, who knows? But it's just something to think about when you're talking about that aspect. Like I said, Sully did exactly the right thing. I mentioned this last week. He made exactly the right choice because he knew the factors that were involved, and he knew his experience and his success and what, his experience with what he had done before. And but when you look at it and bring it into even leadership, when you're talking about leading in a challenging environment where not everything just fits a rote academic aspect, you got to be thinking about that stuff. You got to be thinking about, don't just kind of let your brain go into some rote academic thing. Get your processing involved where that this is what we need to do. You know what? Here's the factors out there. You know what? This factor is coming on scene. My teammate just mentioned that to me. And you know what? They're right. That factor is coming on scene. We don't need to change anything, but let's watch it as we go forward. Or let's tweak it this way a little bit. And so all of those are just some of the factors that when you're talking about growing your team and really making your team reach magical results and everything, those are some of the things that you have to keep in mind, particularly when you're talking about a challenging scenario or an environment. And neuroscience has a lot to that.
You mentioned, we talk about plan B.
Yeah.
Should you always have a plan B, or is it, plan B is going to change? I mean, look at Sully over the Hudson.
Yep.
He could have had a plan B. Someday, if I lose an engine, if I'm near water, I'm going to land on the water. Or easier said than
Possibly.
done.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be all different factors involved. But should you be thinking plan B? Should you have a plan B floating in your mind?
What I would say is that if I was coaching somebody and they asked that question, I would say, well, pick a situation where you find a little bit challenging coming up. And they might kind of relate that to me. And I'd say, okay, what's your plan B for that situation? And then after they maybe tell it to me, then I would ask them this question to go along with what you just said. It's sort of an answer to your question, but the next question I would say, and to what extent do you have to adapt your plan B on the scene, on the situation and stuff like that, and get them thinking about it? And it's like, oh yeah, you know what? Oh yeah, I got to be aware of this. I got to be aware of that. Okay, so your awareness is going to be watching for that, right? Yeah. Good. So the bottom line is, I would say that you always have to have an aspect of at least some initial thinking and processing about if I have to have a plan B, particularly if it's a critical situation, like in piloting. If you got if it's something where the airplane's going to blow up and everybody's going to die, you better have a sort of a plan B to the best that you can, kind of thing, to hopefully do it before it gets there. But the other part of it is that it's good to have some backup plans, but the backup plans are not totally academic. They're not just, well, shut that aside and just do it this way. Well, you know what? Doing it that way, you're probably going to have to adapt some also.
Yeah.
And that's the thinking and the processing that people have to have, leadership teams have to kind of be aware of, so that when unexpected factors come on, they can still get successful results. And that's a challenging aspect of it. So I think it's always good to realize that you got to have a plan B. Now, I will say this, that plan B may not be all academic, but you have a sense for what factors may come on scene and what would we expect to probably come on scene that we didn't really expect to. And if that happens, what do you think we're going to do about it? But are we also ready to adapt that a little bit as we go forward? And so this aspect of plan B is not just a rote academic. We're going to do this, and this, kind of thing. It may be a little bit different. And here's how we're going to be aware of how we're going to adjust that, how we're going to adapt it, and how we're going to make it right. So it's just an interesting concept when you're talking about leading teams in a challenging and sometimes an unpredictable situation, because factors are not always just what you expected. And so the processing of being able to make the right decision based on the evidence that you're seeing, and you're ready if, when you make that adjustment, another factor sneaks in that you didn't expect or whatever, can you tweak it? Can you have the processing ability as a leader for your team to adjust that and adapt it? And have you developed in them the ability to sort of think about aspects where at the point of attack, they need to tweak it like this for the benefit of the team. That can be huge. And so it's just an interesting point when you're talking about these unpredictable and challenging environments and scenarios. But it's an interesting pilot sort of mindset. But in leading your team, it's also key, and having an understanding of what the plan B might be like. But you know what? What am I going to be aware of where I need to tweak that? There might be some times where all of a sudden the plan B, because of factors that come on scene, the plan B, no, we don't do that. Now we're going to tweak it a little bit and do this. But it's just, like I say, it's just something to think about when you're talking about those kind of challenging situations.
I don't think there's a better example than Sullenberg.
I agree with you.
We go back. We talked about it last time, but as you're talking now, Randy, getting a clearer picture for all of this, I don't think it gets any better than that. When you think about, he went to a plan B, chastised by some for, why did he do that?
Yeah.
But your point, and I'm not a pilot, but I completely agree. If he was trying to land on land, how there were so many challenging factors connected to that. The logical choice was landing on the water, and I didn't know that he had seaplane experience. So
and the other part of it too, with what you said, is yes, he could have tried to go over to Teterboro, but, and this is what a lot of people don't realize, there's factors that could apply that make everybody die that nobody else would have even thought about. What he did by landing on the river, what he did because of his past experience, as we mentioned, he minimized risk.
Yes.
And that, when you're talking about you're changing your plans, you want to do it where it can give you success, but it also minimizes the real risk. Because had he tried to get over to Teterboro, and I mentioned this last week, and there's some turbulence on final, guess what? That airplane would have sunk in and maybe hit the ground a mile short of the runway and took out an apartment complex, and there would have been a lot of innocent people dead. And he knew he had the clarity in his processing. He knew that making that choice to land on the river out there and everything, he knew that minimized risk. And with his skills, with the skills that he had demonstrated previously in his flying career a little bit, he knew that he could do it. And it's just a concept that a lot of people don't realize. It's not just clear cut. It's not whatever. So it's just a key point about it.
Yeah. Super cool. Even learning about that and the process for all of this. And no brainer for me, after you said last time we got together that he had seaplane experience. I was like, John.
And that's just something that I learned. I didn't hear anybody say it. I didn't see it on paper, but I heard, and I think it was somebody that was interviewing him kind of thing, I believe, if I remember correctly, because that was some time ago. But he talked about he had some seaplane experience earlier on in his career. Yeah. And guess what? If he did, and if that was true, guess what? That enhances success for him because of his experience and skills and his awareness, situational awareness, but also minimizes risk because it didn't run the risk of people dying when the airplane hit a mile short of the runway. And so it's just, it's just, but it's something that even when you're talking about leaders in a organization, guess what? How are you going to handle situations? Because not every situation is predictable. Not everything fits a rote academic picture. Not everything just lets you go, do this, and just go grab some tea or whatever, kind of thing. A lot of it is where you got to get a sense of what the team is going to do, and then be there and watch it and see how they respond and get an idea as to how they are employing the growth and development that you gave them prior to this. And that's a key point that people need to think about. And so many people don't, because they have a tendency to just think rote academic. And that's not what you want to do when you're leading a team in a challenging situation or, challenging environment.
And this is just a piece of what you teach and coach people on. So I don't want to use a cliche, but the big picture, a lot of us are stuck here. There's so much out here that many of us aren't seeing. Coaching,
you have my compliments on that, because you are right on that. You are right on that.
That's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm getting from you, that we're blinded here. There's so much out here that and of course I have it too. Everybody does the same thing. There's much more going on. Coachingforrelevance.com is the website. Randy, not a hard sell. Have a conversation with him. He's a great guy, and learn how to move your life forward, move your team forward. Randy, great having you on here again today.
I'll tell you what, it's always an honor to be here. So I hope you have a great rest of the day, and we'll look forward to being on again.
We didn't have to even go to Plan B today. It's amazing.
There you go, man.
There you go. All right. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Take care.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.